History of English Literature, Restoration Period, Short Questions with Answers, Part B. Questions 1. Write a short note on heroic tragedy and blank verse tragedy of the Restoration Age. Answer. During Restoration period, there were two types of tragedy. One is heroic tragedy and two is blank verse tragedy. Heroic tragedy is a new development of tragedy during the Restoration Age. The Restoration heroic tragedy is a break from Elizabethan tragedy. The dramatists used heroic couplets, and their concept of tragedy was also different. It represents an heroic hero. The play begins from the climax. It represented the realistic aspects of life rather than emotion. However, heroic tragedy was written in heroic couplet and blank verse was adopted in place of heroic couplet. The tragedy that was written in blank verse were known as blank verse tragedy. Dryden wrote blank verse tragedy in the style of Shakespeare. For example, Dryden's All for Love is an imitation of Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra. Dryden introduces blank verse and removes many of the crudities of the plays. The subtitle of the Dryden's poem, All for Love, is The World's Well Lost. The world is lost for Antony. He lost his kingdom, wife, children, all for Cleopatra. Dryden seems to uphold incestuous love over illegal love and mistress over wife. Dryden plays heroic tragedy in blank verse and not in heroic couplet. The conflict of the play is portrayed by the use of blank verse. At the end, both the hero and heroine meet their deaths. Use of blank verse pathetically conveys the tragedy of Antony and Cleopatra. Question 2. Write a short note on women writers of the Restoration Age. Among the women writers of the 17th century not yet acknowledged are the poets Anne Bradstreet, Anne Killigrew, and Lady Winchelsea, etc. Catherine Phillips, Maria Astell wrote variously, as did Aphra Behn, who became author by the early death of the Dutch husband. Aphra Behn's sex comedies became famous. She tried to show the other side of the libertinism. Her novel, The Rover, is famous, where she shows Angelica Bianca, a famous courtesan, truly loves but experiences the disappointment of free love. Behn's adventure as a colonist in Suriname, a royal spy, entered into her fiction. Her novel, Oroonoco, or The History of the Royal Slave, is an ideological romance. A novel, African prince cruelly enslaved by the colonist is redeemed by the love of the brave, beautiful, and constant Imoinda. Question 3. Write a short note on Restoration Age. Answer. The year 1660 was as memorable as the year 1649, for Charles I was executed by the Parliament in 1649. It was again the same Parliament that restored monarchy and placed Charles II on the British throne in 1660. This is why this age is called Restoration Age. The date 1660 is one of the most significant dates in the history of English literature, as it was in the history of English politics. In that year, Charles II was brought to the throne from which his father has been driven. The restoration was inevitable, as the English people were weary both of the austerity of the Puritan authority and of the instability of the government that followed Cromwell's death. Of course, the Restoration did not bring total peace in England. The conflict between the king and the Parliament did not subside completely. With the coming of Charles II back to England, great changes came in the social and political life of English people. In every way, the Restoration Age heralded the birth of a new age. In fact, the two ages, the Puritan and the Restoration, were utterly contradictory. And to pass from one to another was to experience a heavy shock. A new society and a new literature began in 1660. The Restoration brought about a rage, a sort of well-timed relief from the severity of the Puritans. In fact, the Restoration changed the character of the English people. Literature in England during and after the Restoration seemed to have been bred and nourished by French literary ideals and patterns. Of course, it was a great age for the French authors, particularly for the French dramatists. Under the French influence, literature, especially dramatic literature, grew realistic and flourished. The comedy of manners of the Restoration made a clear departure from the romantic comedy of Shakespeare and other Elizabethan dramatists. Question 4. Write a short note on heroic couplet. Answer. Heroic couplet means the lines of iambic pentameter which rhyme in pairs, A, B, B, C, C, and so on. The objective heroic was applied in the 7th century because of the frequent use of such couplets in epic or heroic poems and in heroic dramas. This verse form was introduced into English poetry by Geoffrey Chaucer and has been in constant use ever since. From the age of John Dryden through that of Samuel Johnson, the heroic couplet was the predominant English measure for all the poetic kinds. Some poets, including Alexander Pope, used it almost to the exclusion of other meters. Dryden used the heroic couplet with great force, and he too retained much of the freedom and flexibility of the earlier masters. His purpose was to develop the colloquial principle of Dryden and his followers, and he used it as an instrument fittest for discourse. Dryden's handling of it has a characteristic sweep, and he makes frequent use of triplets and Alexandrine's Pope. On the other hand, does not do so. Pope's couplet are closed. That is to say, the sense does not run on from one couplet to another. The sense is complete or nearly complete with each couplet. Every couplet thus tends to become a unit by itself and can be taken out and enjoyed irrespective of its context. Pope's use of the heroic couplet is characterized by brevity and preciseness. His couplets are well polished, refined, correct. They have a rare brilliance. They are epigrammatic and easily memorable. Pope is matchless for condensation and concentration. Dryden's use of the heroic couplet gives his poem a variety of cadence which prevents monotony. He shows variety in his use of the heroic couplets, which gives force and vitality to his poetry and avoids monotony. His handling of the couplet is admirable. He made it a perfect medium for satiric purposes. The closed neoclassic couplets contrast with the open pentameter couplets of Keats and Endymion. In the latter, the pattern of stresses varies often from the iambic norm. The syntax is unsystematical and The syntax is unsymmetrical and the couplets run on freely, with the rhyme serving to color rather than to stop the verse. Question 5. Write a short note on comedy of manners, Restoration Comedy. Answer. The Restoration Comedy of Manners owes much to the brilliant dramas of the French writer Molière, 1622 to 1673. Molière's good spirit, natural wit and humor, dramatic amplitude, resourceful plotting, and witty dialogues gave a strong impetus to the Restoration playwrights. Some of the successful dramatists of the age are like Wycherley, Etheridge, and Congreve followed Molière in the realm of the comedies of manner and turned his gift to something original by their own creative art by innovating the English comedy of manners. Though the comedy of manners followed the Johnsonian comedy of humor in its social content and the depiction of the reality of the contemporary life, it is different from the comedy of humors. The comedy of manners is concerned with the manners of the upper class of society, whereas the Johnsonian comedy of humor deals with the queer effects of various humors found in humanity at large and has a much broadened social range. The Restoration comedy of manners is mainly concerned with the intrigues as well as affectation of the fashionable English society of the 17th century. Moral lapses and depravity form a general feature in the comedy of manners. The comedy of manners represent social life, of course, confined to a narrow circle. The social manners depicted in the comedy of manners do not belong to the people in masses, but to the snobbish, artificial, well-to-do society of the Restoration community. In fact, the social environment represented in this type of comedy is wholly aristocratic, but definitely superficial. The playwright seems to be concerned with the cultivated upper-class ethos that is immoral. The greatest master of the Restoration comedy of manners is, of course, William Congreve. His four great plays, The Old Bachelor, The Double Dealer, Love for Love, and The Way of the World. In his plays, the comedy of manners reaches perfection. His plays are faithful reflection of the upper-class life of his day. The Restoration comedy of manners has no doubt certain amount of immorality and vulgarity, but that is the inevitable effect of the close relation that comedy ought to have with society and social life. Congreve's dramatic triumph is attributed to his last comedy, The Way of the World, which is taken as the most perfect example of the comedy of manners, which gives an external picture of English social life with its activities, intrigues, fables. After the restoration of monarchy in 1660, in fact, The Way of the World is a characteristic product of the age, and Mirabell, Millamant, Lady Wishfort, Mrs. Marwood, Mr. Fainall are all the representatives of the snobbish society of the time. Question 6. What to know about William Congreve and his works? Answer. William Congreve, 1670 to 1729, was born at Bardsey, near Leeds, of a good family, and was educated in Ireland, finally at Trinity College, Dublin in 1691. In 1691, he came to London to enter the Middle Temple, but abandoned law for literature. He wrote all his plays before he was 30, when he deserted the drama to spend the rest of his life as a very popular society gentleman, largely supported by generous government pensions. His first comedy was The Old Bachelor, 1693, and this was followed by The Double Dealer, 1693, Love for Love, 1695, and The Way of the World, 1700. His one tragedy, The Morning Bridge, 1697, was in the vein of the later Elizabethan tragedians. Congreve is undoubtedly the greatest of the Restoration comedy writers. In his work, The Comedy of Manners reaches perfection. His plays are a faithful reflection of the upper-class life of his day, but their undoubted immorality is saved from being objectionable by brilliant wit, a hard finish, and a total lack of realism. In the artificial society which he depicts, moral judgment would be out of place. The tone is one of the cynical vivacity. The characters are well drawn, and Congreve's prose is lucid, concise, and pointed, and shows an excellent ear for rhyme and cadence. In all things, he is a polished artist whose distinctive quality is brilliance. All Congreve's plays, except The Way of the World, had an immediate success, but it is ironical that this one should be singled out by posterity as his masterpiece. Free from the occasional sentimental touches which mar The Double Dealer, it is the best example of the comedy of manners, skillful in characterization and completely free from the coarseness and realism which spoil the work of so many of his contemporaries. From it comes the following passage in which two gentlemen are backbiting an acquaintance. It is a typical specimen of Congreve's prose. Thank you for watching. My next video will be on the Restoration period, Short Questions and Answers, episode 2.